You know how to calm your mind. It isn't working. For about an hour, something inside you was settled. Then the phone buzzed. Then the meeting started. Then the calm dissolved so completely, you forgot you ever held it. You probably blamed yourself. You assumed the practice failed because you weren't disciplined enough, because you didn't journal long enough, because you weren't serious about it. But the practice didn't fail because of you. It failed because the ground it stood on no longer exists. This is what almost nobody is saying out loud. The book on your shelf has Marcus Aurelius on the cover, or Epictetus, or Seneca. You bought it because something in you knew it was for you. The clarity of the language, the age of the wisdom, the promise that someone 2,000 years ago had already solved the feeling that wakes you at 3 in the morning. And for a moment, it works. Then the moment passes. The standard diagnosis for what happens next is that you need more discipline, more routine, earlier mornings, longer journals, better habits, a harder version of yourself. This is the diagnosis being sold everywhere right now. Stoicism as a personal optimization toolkit. Marcus Aurelius repackaged as the original productivity guru. The dichotomy of control flattened into a slogan you can put on a coffee mug. It is the dominant story, and it is almost completely wrong. Because the question is not whether you have enough discipline to run the practice. The question is whether anyone in conditions like yours could run it at all. And that is a very different question. In 2020, a clinical psychologist named Lucas Lafreniere, working with Michelle Newman at Penn State, published a study in the journal Behavior Therapy. He took patients diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and asked them to log every specific worry, every day for 10 days. Then, for 30 days afterward, they tracked whether the feared events actually occurred. Approximately 91% of the worried about outcomes never happened. Of the small fraction that did occur, most were rated by participants as better than feared. This is a study of a clinical anxious population, not a universal claim that 9 out of 10 fears come to nothing. It is a measurement of how the anxious mind treats imagined futures as predictive data taxed in advance on outcomes that overwhelmingly never arrive. Now hold that ratio in your mind. Because in the 1st century of the Common Era, a Roman senator named Seneca wrote a letter that survives as the 13th in his collection to a younger friend named Lucilius. The letter is about anticipatory fear, and in it, paraphrasing carefully because the precise wording matters, he argued that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Most of what we fear never arrives. The fear itself costs more than the events that do. The Penn State study converted Seneca's intuition into a measured ratio inside a clinical population 19 centuries later. But here is where the story usually stops. And here is where it should not. Because for Seneca, and for the philosopher Epictetus, and for the emperor Marcus Aurelius, knowing this fact was not the medicine. The medicine was a practice. The Stoics called it Prosochē, continuous attention, the trained capacity to catch a thought in the moment it arises, before it carries you somewhere you did not choose to go. The French scholar Pierre Hadot spent his career arguing that Prosochē was the foundation everything else in Stoicism rested on: the dichotomy of control, the view from above, the premeditation of misfortune, the evening review. Every Stoic technique you have ever heard of presupposes a prior capacity, the capacity to return to your own mind at will and observe what is happening inside it, not the thought, the watching. This is what the popular framing leaves out. Stoicism is not a set of insights to apply. It is what the Greeks called askesis, a daily exercise that requires sustained, willed attention as its operating system. The Stoics did not believe you could think your way out of anxiety. They believed you had to train every day the capacity to be present to your own mind in motion. The insights were the curriculum. Prosochē was the student capable of receiving them, which leads to the question this episode is built around. What happens when you try to run that practice on a mind that no longer has the conditions to maintain prosochē in the first place? Here is where this channel has to be careful. The dominant version of Stoicism circulating right now treats the Stoics as serene figures who solve the problem and then sells their techniques as a performance toolkit. Dawn routines, cold plunges, productivity rituals dressed in Roman drag. This is the structural inverse of what they taught. The Stoics prescribed indifference to outcome as the cure for the very anxiety the optimization industry now sells the cure for. A practice built to disengage from achievement has been rebranded as fuel for it. And the figures themselves do not fit the marketing. Epictetus was born into slavery in Phrygia in the 1st century. He lived with a lifelong injury whose cause the ancient sources do not agree on. He was freed only after Nero's death and later exiled from Rome by the Emperor Domitian. Marcus Aurelius wrote the Meditations not in a temple, but in a military tent on the Danube frontier during a plague that killed members of his own family and a war that nearly broke the empire. The book is a private notebook. He never intended for anyone to read it. Seneca, the wealthiest Stoic, served Nero, owned slaves, and was eventually ordered by that same emperor to kill himself. These men were not serene. They built the practice precisely because life was unstable, loud, and dangerous. Their genius was not that they had peace. It was that they could return to their own minds in conditions designed to take them. We have the same neural capacity. We do not have the same conditions. So the practice fails, not because the technique is wrong, not because you are undisciplined. The practice fails because the substrate it runs on, sustained, willed attention to one's own mind, is the precise cognitive capacity that the largest information markets ever assembled are funded to fragment. The Stoics built a medicine for the unguarded mind. They built it under conditions that at least permitted the mind to be guarded. We inherited the medicine with the user manual quietly burned. So, here is the harder version of the question. If the practice presupposes a capacity the environment is engineered to dissolve, what would it actually take in your real life to rebuild even a fragment of that capacity? Not for an afternoon, not for a week of journaling, for a year, for 10 years, for a way of being. Next time, we ask a quieter question, because the practice presupposed a mind. And the mind presupposed something else, something we have spent the last 100 years dismantling more thoroughly than any technique we have lost. The people around it, the village.